Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my summer watercolor series. In this series, I'm teaching you really simple watercolor tutorials that are perfect for the summertime. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this loose watercolor watermelon. It's really easy to do, even for beginners, so please keep watching if you want to learn how. Also, be sure to check out my previous video where I showed you how to create 2 different loose lemon paintings. Alright, so let's dive right in. We're only going to need 2 colors and black, and the colors that I'm using here are olive green and alizarin crimson hue. I've cut a small sheet of Arches watercolor paper, and I'm just mixing up a good amount of water with my alizarin crimson. And then we're just going to go right in and start applying it to the paper. I'm using my Wonder Forest number 8 round brush for this, and all I'm doing is roughly drawing in with my paintbrush sort of a pie shape, or rather a slice of pie. I'm going to keep the outlines really light, and I'm going to start filling in the interior of my sketch lines just using plain old water. So by just using the water here, I'm just pulling that color down into the areas that I've wet. And I want to make sure to keep a lot of white space happening in this piece because that's just going to allow the piece to look a lot looser. Now we're going to make this slice of watermelon look a little bit more three-dimensional. So I'm going to start creating the side of the slice. And I'm just making sure to leave a white space along that right side edge that I've created because I don't want these colors or this paint to run together. So I'm just sort of creating a wedge to the side here, sort of a long rectangle, and I've just used a really light wash of the red. Now I want this to be a little bit more loose and splotchy looking just because I really love that look, especially for summer pieces. So I'm just taking really clean water. I did this in my lemons tutorial as well, but I really love the effect. So just take really clean water on your brush and gently touch the tip of your brush to some of the wet areas of paint. That's going to allow just some of that paint to seep out into that wet area. You want to make sure to wet enough of the paper first so that your paint bleed has enough room to bleed out. You can always go back in after, as I'm doing here, with clean water and just expand that wet area to allow for a little bit more space for it to blend. So I've let that completely dry, and now I'm going in with olive green, and I'm getting that nice and wet on my brush as well. And then I'm just going to go in and add the skin of the watermelon. So I'm taking my brush and I'm just drawing a line outside of the red area. I'm making sure to leave that white space. And I'm just pulling the paint along with the very tip of my brush to get it into the shape that I want it. You can also keep a little bit of white space throughout the skin as well. It just gives it more of that loose effect. And I'm just, with the very tip of my brush, cleaning up some of those edges. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the clean water. Make sure your brush is nice and clean before you go ahead and do this. You don't want any pigment on there at all. And you're just going to wet an area outside of what you've painted and then very lightly touch some parts of the wet paint to the brush and just let it bleed out. And again, I'm just expanding that wet area just to allow the paint to bleed out again because I don't want any harsh edges along the exterior of this paint. You can see here as well that even though we used red, because of the amount of water that we added to it, it actually is more of a pink color. So that works really well for a watermelon piece. Now I've decided that I want to add a couple splatters. I started doing this one way, and then I'm going to show you a different way to do it. You can just do it this way where you splatter it onto a dry piece of paper, but I actually wanted the splatters to be a little bit looser, a little more wet looking. So I decided to go in with some clean water and kind of erase those ones that splattered in the background, and I'm going to keep the paper wet this time before I add the splatters. And that's just going to allow them to sort of bleed out and have a more muted appearance. So as you see here, I'm just splattering on some paint into that wet area. And that's just gonna add a little bit more color coming out of the background. It just adds a little bit more interest. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here. So I've wet the paper again. You don't want this to be crazy wet. You just want the paper to appear damp. And then I'm going to take a nice mixture of wet paint and just splatter that directly onto that wet area. Now that the green has dried pretty well, I'm going to darken the outer edge of it a little bit more. I'm just really roughly going in with my brush, and you can see there is still some wet areas, and I actually quite like that effect of how the darker tone kind of bleeds into the lighter one. I'm just going in with a tissue right now to sort of blot up some of those splatters and just kind of get rid of some where I don't think it needs it. I'm gonna let this dry completely, and then we're almost done. We're gonna go in with some black seed detail. So with the watermelon completely dry, I've just grabbed my number 2 Wonderforest watercolor brush. By the way, these are almost gone. I only have just over a dozen left. If you guys want them, the link is in my description. So with this brush, I'm just creating little teardrop shapes, and I'm leaving a little bit of white space in the center. It just helps add that little bit of highlight detail, even though it's pink coming through. It just looks a lot cuter, I think. So I'm just gonna place those wherever I think I want them. And when I do this, I'm keeping my paint nice and concentrated. So less water, only a tiny bit of water has been added to the paint just to pretty much just to activate it. And I don't want to make it too watery. Like I don't want any beads of water happening, because that would kind of make the seeds just not look right. So that's pretty much all there is to this piece. I hope that you guys liked it. If you try it, tag me on Instagram, and please give the video a thumbs up. It really does help me out, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you missed my last video, definitely check that out too. It will be in the end screen for you. Also, let me know what else you guys want to see in the series in the comments below. I've also continued this series over on my Patreon page. I've created this peach tutorial. If you guys would like to see that tutorial and become a patron, I would absolutely love to have you. Here are just some of the things that my patrons receive. There will be a link in my description, as well as one on the end screen. I also have a few new things that I've added to my Wonderforest store, including this cute t-shirt, as well as a matching hoodie, and this Creativity Takes Courage beach tote. If you want to check out what I've got, head on over to wonderforest.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.